Hey, how's it going everybody? You got Sketch here and welcome back to the channel. On today's episode, we're taking a look at a competitor to the Tony Hawk's Pro Skater franchise that even early on was a potential contender with its similarities as well as its pedigree of pro skaters involved with the project. Today we're checking out Grind Session, developed by Shaba Games and published by Sony Computer Entertainment for the PlayStation 1, releasing in May of 2000. What's interesting here is Shaba Games would eventually become a contributing developer to the Pro Skater series, as well as a couple of the Activision O2 branded spin-off games like Matt Hoffman Pro BMX and Sean Murray's Wakeboarding Unleashed. This, much like its competition, was pretty healthy in its gameplay and fun factor, releasing 4 months prior to the soon-to-be explosion that was Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2, and just 2 months after EA's Street Skater 2, putting it in a tough release window with a lot of similar extreme sports titles. Grind Session, however, does get a lot of things right, and does them differently enough to an extent, but still gets overshadowed by its allies despite having an awesome skateboarding game that's quite underrated. Here, the objective is pretty simple. Choose one of 6 pro skaters, the likes of Ed Templeton, John Cardial, Willie Santos, Pigpen, Beth Burnside, and Daewon Song, who's featured on the game's cover. Along with 4 customizable skaters, you'll rip through 10 locales around North America and beyond to gain the most respect along the tour and earn the keys to the coveted skate mansion. In a series of spot challenges and contests, you'll travel through the country to put in the most work and get the prizes at the end. Nothing too serious as far as the plot, and it's pretty straightforward with its opening montage, featuring footage of all the pro skaters, which was a compilation of footage from skate videos around 97 to 1999. Gameplay-wise, you've got a 3D arcade-style third-person skateboarding game that feels very similar to the first Tony Hawk game, with nearly identical controls, with the face buttons performing grinds and flip tricks and grabs. So that will feel familiar. Where Grind Session differs, however, is with the skater's eye mechanic, which highlights objective paths and obstacles. This helps guide you learning the areas to see where everything is at in order to max out your respect rating for that spot. Otherwise, it follows a very similar challenge structure to Tony Hawk by doing high score challenges, finding special items, and hitting certain lines placed throughout the spots. The roster of skaters also have their specialties, with Daewon being the all-arounder, and each other skater having their specialties in different aspects of skating. John Cardial, naturally and true to form, gets more hang time at a base and can hit higher obstacles off the rip. All hail Cardial. Here you can also manual, which predates Tony Hawk 2, bring it into their game later on that year. This is interesting considering that Daewon Song was and still is a masterful manual technician, and it's rad to see one of his signatures worked into the game. As you progress and unlock new areas, you'll also unlock new tricks similar to Thrasher's Skate and Destroy. You're able to mix up your bag of tricks pretty well here, and you can save certain builds if you want to experiment with some of the variations between skaters, and each is different enough to tailor your experience to how you'd want to skate. Another trait that differs from the competition is how its line system actually adds more time to your run, and certain lines offer multipliers based on the difficulty. This adds a bit of strategy to the mix if you're going for perfect runs or just want to maximize your time to roast each spot. Going back to the controls for a moment, there's actually a few nuances that actually improved upon those seen previously in the Tony Hawk's Pro Skater franchise and rival titles that released prior, with its physics naturally leveling out skaters that are airing out of ramps. In Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, if you unintentionally air out and head towards flat ground, you'll fall 9 times out of 10. In Grind Session, the physics force you back up so you land back on your board if you air out towards obstacles or flat land. So that's a useful change. Grind Session also utilizes a balance meter while grinding or sliding, similar to Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, so as far as game feel, they're one and the same. Graphics wise, much like its allies, Grind Session is in 3D with a third-person viewpoint as you traverse several national locales and contests, featuring New York City, Portland's Burnside DIY, Atlanta, Georgia, Detroit, Michigan, and a handful of others along with the skate mansion once you unlock each city's key. There are some pretty faithful recreations of spots here, along with a few contest maps that are actually fairly decent course layouts, each containing secret areas and unique stage challenges. This also looks fairly similar to the Tony Hawk games as far as character sprites, though models are slightly sharper by comparison. Sprite and trick animations also look pretty good here with some fairly accurate board and spin physics. Environments from spot to spot are also pretty good, with each region having its own respective spot in some capacity represented, and they don't look bad for a PS1 release from 2000 at all really. The skate mansion unlockable doubles down with more locales as you unlock each room, adding additional spots and obstacles, and these sections do get pretty interesting. You get a lot of fun stuff to skate through the game's 8 areas, and with all the secrets and multiple spots, it has a good variety of things to try. Board graphics in game also look pretty solid with some nice recreations of each skater's pro model boards, along with some decent recreations of their pro model shoes if they had them during the game's development. The early Daewon Song DVS and Ed Templeton America shoe models were pretty well represented here, so the attention to detail is pretty on point. The animations of each skater also does a fairly good mimic of their styles and has some really solid motion capture of how these pros actually skate. Long and short of it is the graphics and presentation are solid and runs relatively smooth throughout the experience without much in the way of visual hiccups. Sound wise, Grind Session also slaps with some satisfying grind and slide audio, and the sound of your meter filling up lets out a thunderous clap, and the sound of each ollie does sound really authentic. So the effects work here is pretty good. While you don't get unique voice lines from each skater like in the Tony Hawk Pro Skater games, you do get some clean and crisp audio nearly everywhere else. The soundtrack is a real star of the show here, with artists that would have been prominent features in the videos these skaters were featured in at the time. The playlist contains artists like Black Flag, Cornelius, KRS-One, Jurassic 5, The Jizza, NoFX, and Sonic Youth, just to name a few. What's funny is that several of these groups were also Vans Warped Tour regulars. This, much like Skate and Destroy, featured an eclectic catalog of hip-hop artists and mixed them with punk rock and alternative bands, striking a nice balance with the tunes. Audio balance is also, by default, pretty well leveled and not having the skating overpower the background music or vice versa. All around, Grind Session is a well-rounded entry on pretty much all fronts considering. In short, Grind Session is a majorly overlooked PS1 skateboarding game that deserves far more appreciation than it gets. For fans of arcade style and skate simulator type games, this one is a solid choice and is often found for super cheap. I found this a few years back for $5 complete, and it seems to still hold around that price within roughly a $10 margin, give or take. So this one is certainly fair of this price of entry, which is exceeded by its fun factor. Had this released with some more hype behind it and possibly a better date, this could have made a bigger splash than it did. Despite all of that, this is still an awesome pickup if you want a skateboarding game that's got its similarities to the greats while also doing its own thing and running with it. Grind Session gets an 8 out of 10 and comes recommended to fans of skateboarding games and skate nostalgia enthusiasts, since this really is a time capsule of the late 90s skateboarding scene. It's got enough variety with its gameplay despite its smaller roster, and has a ton of bonus content to unlock if you're down to put in the work. This, much like its competitors, is a fun one to play through and is definitely worth the price of entry, and is still relatively easy to find in the wild or an online shop. This had potential for a sequel and even had decent reviews upon release, but the Tony Hawk's Pro Skater franchise was a Goliath by the time the second game came out, so a lot of similar titles got lost in the shuffle. If you can find this one in your area, it's totally worth your time. And thank you again if you made it this far into the video. If you find these videos helpful, that's awesome. I'm glad you can use this as a resource. Check back often. We'll have more reviews and commentaries coming up in the near future. But until then, take it easy and stay safe out there. I'll see you on the next one.